Section 1.7 is about using the midpoint formula and the distance formula. So this first box is talking about how to use midpoint formulas. If I'm on a number line, I'm just going to find the average of the two coordinates. So that's what this formula is telling you to do. It's saying that I would find the sum of these two and then just divide by 2. If I'm in a coordinate plane, we're still going to find the average, but we got to find the average of the x's and find the average of the y's. So that's why you may want to highlight this formula, because that's the one that we'll end up using for midpoint. So let's look at that. So on your first example, it gives you a number line that you need to find the midpoint of. So it says that one is at -4 and the other one is at 9. So what I could do is I could add -4 plus 9, which is 5, and then divide it by 2. So my midpoint would be at 2.5. On the next one, we are in a coordinate plane. So it gives you 2 points. You're at 7, 5, and then you're at 2, -4. So I'm going to find the average of the x's and the average of the y's. So I'm going to need to add 7 plus 2, which is 9, and then divide that by 2, which is 4.5 for my x coordinate. And then I'm going to find the average of the y. So I add 5 and -4, which is 1, divide that by 2, which is 1/2. I don't have a preference. You can put it in fraction or decimal. My only thing is make sure it's exact. Do not round any decimals. I would like for you to pause the video and try the got it question. So in the got it question, the first one asks you to find the midpoint if you're on a number line. So I would have to add -12 and 4 and divide it by 2. So this would be -8. -8 divided by 2 would be -4. The other question is asking you to find the midpoint when you're in a coordinate plane. So I would find the average of the x's, so I would add 5 and 3, which is 8, and divide it by 2. And then I would have to find the average of the y, so I would add -10 and 6, which is -4, and divide that by 2. So my midpoint would be at 4, -2. So just remember that you're always doing the averages. You just have to make sure you remember if we're doing the x's and the y's, or if we're just doing the coordinates on the midpoint. Alright, then on the back side, the second example, you're still using the midpoint formula, but now you have to set up an equation in order to find the missing piece. So what this is saying is that you have a midpoint at -2, 1, and one of your endpoints is at -5, 7. So if I were to draw this out, what this is saying is we have an endpoint at -5, 7, and my midpoint is at -2, 1. My job is I have to figure out what is this other endpoint. Okay? So if I were to give you a visual, this is what this is depicting. I'm trying to figure out what is this other point that I used in order to find the midpoint. So you kind of have to work backwards. So I like to set up an equation. So think about it, if I just left it as this, I would still find the average of the x's. So I would do -5 plus x, and then I would divide it by 2, just like we normally would. But now we're going to set up an equation because I already know what my midpoint of my x is going to be. So I'm going to set it equal to -2. And I'm also going to do the same thing for the y's. I'm going to find the average of the y, so I'm going to add 7 and y, and I'm going to divide that by 2 and set it equal to the midpoint y coordinate. Okay? Now we're going to work backwards, which means we're going to solve these equations. So my first step will be multiplying by 2 on both of those. So that's why I end up getting -4 over here, and I'm just left with the top. On this one, when I multiplied by 2, I end up with just 7 plus y equals 2. Now I can just do add or subtract. So I would add 5 over here, so my x-coordinate would be 1. And I would subtract 7 from over here, so it would be -5. So my other endpoint would be 1, -5. So what I would encourage is to kind of draw a picture, give you an idea of what to look like, and then make sure that you set up your equations to work backwards on them. Pause the video and try the got it question. So again, if I were to draw a picture on this guy, I have the midpoint at 4, -9. One of my endpoints is -3, -5. So I need to find the other one. So to set it up, you should be adding negative 3 plus x over 2 equals the x coordinate of your midpoint. And then negative 5 plus y over 2 equals the y coordinate of your midpoint. So then to solve, I would need to multiply by 2. So I would get 8 and negative 18. And then you should be adding 3 and adding 5. So your other endpoint should be 11 and negative 13. This is always kind of confusing for students, so if you have questions, please let us know so that we can come help you and reiterate. Alright, the last part of this is you using the distance formula. The distance formula is somewhat using the Pythagorean theorem. So you have to do the square root, the difference of the x's squared, plus the difference of the y squared. Okay, so it's really just making sure that you plugged them in the right spots. I always get the question of, does it matter which one you set as the first point and which one do you set as the second point? No, it does not matter. So if you reverse these, you should still get the same answers. So don't worry about which one you label as the ones and which one you label as the twos. Okay? So when I'm doing my points, I have negative 7, 5, and 4, negative 3. I'm going to label the first one with x1, y1, and I'm going to label the second one with x2, y2. So if I plug stuff in, x2 was x2 I have as 4, but notice that I reversed it around. That's okay. Again, it doesn't matter which order that you put these in. You can do them in whatever order you would like. Okay? So if I did it in this formula, it says to do 4 minus negative 7. And then on the other set, it says I need to do negative 3 minus 5. So then I would solve it. So I would do 4 minus negative 7, which would be 11. And I would do negative 3 minus 5, which is negative 8. You can square, square both of those. So you have 11 squared, which is 121. And then square the negative 8, so you get 64. Then I would have to add those two, so I get 185. This does say to round to the nearest tenth, so you should be getting a decimal. So I'm going to do the square root of this number, and I get 13.6. Now, when you're doing this, you don't have to break it down into all these steps if you don't want to. You could technically type this in as one big string. So if you want to just type this in with a squared, you can jump to this. And if you want to type that in as a squared, you can. Okay, just be careful typing in everything with your square roots just because it adds in an extra set of parentheses. So you got to make sure you add in. So I would break it into steps, and if you want to type in this section in your calculator and then this section, that would kind of help alleviate writing all that stuff. Okay, so midpoint formula, distance formula, kind of going back to your Algebra 1 days, you're just plugging stuff into the appropriate spots and then solving them out.